Greetings, all. Shardvixen here. So I had a whole different vlog planned, but I've been sick all week, so that one didn't get done. Hopefully it'll get done by next week, but it's not like you would know, except that I just told you. So instead, I'm going to talk about biases. Now, bias is different than prejudice. Biased is towards anything, and it can be towards something which is considered positive, or it can be against something which can be considered negative. Prejudice is just negative, and it's towards an individual in an or their social group. So when we were talking about our bubbles, and you have to excuse me, I'm cold. That's why I have the blanket. When we were talking about our bubbles, we talked about how the bubble from the inside is coated with different, like, I think of it as shades of color, but you can think of it as anything you want. It can be shapes, or it can be like lenses on a camera. It can be, anything. Those are your biases, and you're raised with biases, and the people you hang out with, you have biases, and your teachers have biases, and everyone has biases. And so what happens is that we become less open-minded when our biases are challenged, or our biases come into play. And everyone has them. You couldn't be raised without biases. I mean, even if you were raised in a white room with no other stimuli, you'd still have a bias, either for or against white. That's just, that's how your personal viewpoint of that white room was. And so as you cruise down through life, white could represent good or bad to you, or hot or cold, or negative or positive, or scary, happy, however you ended up perceiving your white room. Most people who are raised in more negative environments have more biases, and biases are pretty much based on your own personal experiences. Other people can pass on and confirm those biases, but how you look at the world is really based on your own take on those biases. I'm not going to go into the difference between bias and prejudice, because there's a whole bunch of stuff out there. There's a YouTube video on it. Just Google what's the difference between bias and prejudice, and you will get the actual direct meaning of it. So an example of a bias towards something is your grandmother made you oatmeal with a certain way all the time. And whenever you would meet people who could make oatmeal that same way, you would have a bias towards them. You just assumed they were good people because your grandma was a good person. Another example of bias against something is if I explained in one of my my gaming videos, if everyone in your house told you that people who wore green hats were bad, then over a period of time, you would develop that bias towards green hats. Sometimes, though, if you're a rebellious kind of child, like me, you might have a bias towards those people with green hats because, maybe you think your family's a little odd, and, they're closed-minded, and maybe the people with green hats are, open-minded. That's the case in my life for biases. If people have shared or kind of had biases growing up for me, I tended to find out if they were really true, like if the bias was really true. there was a subtle prejudice in my house. So uh, um, the subtle prejudice is that where people don't perceive that they're prejudiced, but yet still make prejudiced comments. And then when you point out, they get very, very upset with you because they say, "Oh, I'm not prejudiced." um, those develop from biases, but biases by nature are experience bounded, whereas prejudice is based on myth. There's no sound reason for why it is. Um, an example that would have been the white room. If you were raised in a white room until you were like, I don't know, until you were an adult, and then they released you out into the world, you may decide that anybody who hadn't been raised in a white room were bad. There was something wrong with them. And then after a while, that developed towards a whole group of people, and that would be a prejudice. Again, somehow I ended up talking about it, even though I wasn't going to, because it's a very tricky slope to be on. So when people say they're open-minded and they don't have biases, that could be true, but either it means that they've acknowledged their biases and have learned to move past them, or they're not being truthful with themselves. Because even smallest like bias is, here's an example. I have a bias against fruit and Jello. I can't stand fruit and Jello. I don't like the squishiness of it. I don't like squishy fruit anyway, but I really don't like it in Jello or pudding. I don't like fruit and pudding either. I don't like any of that. And so, which is weird because I do like apple pie, which is kind of in a gel, like, I guess, like a glaze. The glazes don't bother me as much, but I really don't like food inside Jello. And so that bias occurred because I was 7 and I had pneumonia, life-threatening pneumonia, and I was in the hospital. And what they fed me was Jello and fruit, and it was disgusting then, and it hasn't gotten any better for me. But I have tried, because I've had friends who are like, "Oh, you've got to try my pistachio Jello pudding, blah blah blah," and it'll always have fruit in it. And so I try it because I'm trying to go past my bias of it, that not all fruit in Jello or pudding is going to be disgusting. I haven't found that to be true. I mean, I don't mind the Jello part of it, but the fruit part of it is still like, blah. Another bias that you could have is that you think that you'll get sick from the flu shot. I have that one. Only because coincidentally, and I don't believe in coincidence, that every time I have the flu shot, I get sick. So, and I know that the flu shot doesn't have any live virus in it, so it's probably more of a placebo effect on me. I think I'm going to get sick, therefore I get sick. But that's a bias against it. You can have biases towards clothes, you can have biases towards beliefs, you can have biases towards, like I said, food. You can have biases against movies because every movie that you've seen done by Johnny, we'll make up a guy, Johnny, or I know an example, what is that guy that did the Last Airbender? Now I can't think of his name. Anyway, so every movie that he's produced seems a little odd. So that finally what happens is when his movies come out, people are like, or every movie's directed, sorry. Every movie he's directed, I know his name, I'm sorry, blank, blank, blank. But every movie that he's directed hasn't turned out to be as good. So now when he has a new movie out, people have a bias towards going to see that movie because the experience tells them that every movie thus far has been bad. So then in our bubbles, when we go through the world and we meet people and we do things and whatever, the biases are there. And sometimes they're good biases, sometimes they're bad biases, but you have to learn to to have an open mind, you have to first acknowledge that you have a bias, and then you have to figure out how to get around that bias. And then, and acknowledge that it is a bias, because some people don't recognize it as a bias and think of it as a fact. And then that fact becomes where myths are come from in dealing with people, places, and things. So that's the end of this vlog. Like I said, I've been sick all week. Haven't gotten much done. I had a different idea for the vlog, so maybe I'll get it done this week if I start to feel better. It's part of my fibromyalgia, and then it's also probably just the weather or whatever. Probably mostly my fibromyalgia. I don't know. One of the side effects of my fibromyalgia is that I get flu-like feelings. And so 2 or 3 days of the week, I will be just down. I'll sleep a lot. And I have a lack of concentration. I have a lack of motivation. I don't want to do anything. I just kind of stare at the wall. And then my shoulders are bad. And I fell a couple days ago. I fell on the stairs. I didn't hurt myself per se, but my arms were unable to support me because of the problem with my shoulders. And so I fell on my behind and slid down the stairs, scared my kids. But they're sore from trying to support me, grabbing on so I wouldn't fall and hurt myself worse. So sometimes what will happen if I overextend myself, use muscles or whatever beyond what I normally can use, I get sick. It's really weird. It's the strangest thing ever. Never had this experience in my life, and it only started like a year or so. Well, we're going on 2 years now. So that's kind of why I got started in YouTube, was to give myself something to do. Anyway, so I'm going to make this one short. And the reason I'm talking about biases and perception and stuff like that is because when later on as the vlog starts going and I talk about, there'll be the rambling, which is just me talking, and then there'll be me taking songs, movies, books, and talking about that, and then there'll be me just talking about things. So I'll catch you all on the flip side.